Alright, in this video I want to cover for our one update in version 4 of our ESS portal is around what we call kind of server storage. So let me first start, go to the settings, and you might see some new settings out here and you might go, what are these settings? That's what I'm hoping to explain here. So under other, at the bottom you'll see a on-off switch for use server storage to improve performance. You'll see a clear server storage, you'll see a rebuild server storage, as well as a current count of the number of items in server storage. Kind of to go along with this as well, there is a performance testing kind of component we added, which this really gives you some of the kind of top function calls or methods that we tend to interact with, like getting the dashboard data for the service health dashboard, getting a list of business services, the notification events, for example. And the way this works, I can run all the tests if I want to, or if I just want to isolate and test a particular thing. I can kind of click on one of these, kind of start the tests. I get a duration. I get, based off the last time it ran, how does it compare to the previous one, and how does it run slower or faster from the last time. So this just gives me a way to kind of manipulate or adjust maybe kind of how things are queried, or adjust, in this case, the use of server storage, and kind of evaluate how are things performing from a testing perspective. So first of all, I can turn off server storage, but what it is there is a table out here. Let me show you the output of this first that holds a number of kind of server-side copies of records that we use. So like, for example, the catalog data that we show, if I were to show and look for, say, catalog, you'll see catalog data that we kind of show on the request things page. So those are the categorization that counts whether or not the category has security tied to roles or user criteria. A lot of that kind of definition information is stored in a server cache table, so that when we go to process it, we don't have to rebuild or re-engineer that information. We just have to look at certain categories that maybe have a security check to them and reevaluate what items should show up for the user based off of those roles or user criteria that's defined. This allows us to kind of speed up the data capture. The other types of records that are out here is any record that is viewed, say a catalog item, for example. It'll store a copy of that, and so you'll get kind of a JSON stored copy of the output of this, which kind of looks like this, which basically outlines some of the compiled information about that catalog item that we present to the consumer. So it allows us to not have to recompile it. Now, another thing you'll notice in these servers records is there is language. So it is based off of, if you're a multi-language kind of portal environment where you have English and Spanish, right? So if you were to look at, for example, in this case, this particular catalog item, we have the Spanish version, the Japanese version. The reason for that is that there's categories that may be, like in this case, you can kind of see the categories might be translated. There may be other attributes, buttons, etc., that we display in compilation about these items that are localized to the language. So we're storing a language version of each of those records that are cached. And so the benefit of that is if I'm a Spanish speaker and I log in and I have my language set to Spanish, it's going to use this record or pull this record from its cache to use to display to me. Now, the other thing to note with this is these are persistent records. There is you'll see a background of true versus background of false. So the background of true are rebuilt nightly. At least that's the default schedule. So there's a scheduled job that comes with our application. You'll see it called rebuild server storage data, kind of set to run at 2 a.m. every night. Goes and runs a beep rebuild. You can also run the same operation by doing this rebuild server storage function here. And basically it'll rebuild all the items that are flagged as background. The other thing that drives kind of a refresh of this data is if I, for example, like an incident record in here, if I had one of these incident records and it were updated, the way the code is written is it's looking at what was the kind of updated date of within this data. Like, for example, in the incident record, there is an attribute in here for right here, updated numeric. When was the last date that it was updated in terms of the server storage record, and it'll compare that against what is the most recent update date of that incident record. And if the incident record has been updated more recently, then it'll reload the cache and recompile the output. So the end result you get is a new fresh output of that incident if it's been updated. So just to give you an example of that, right, so let me go to one of my incident records. Let's see a record here that's been modified today but is in an active kind of work in progress status. Right, so if I were to go to that incident, and I was trying to move this into a resolve kind of status, right, and I say resolve incident. What I'll find is that if I go to like the server storage table of this, right, and I look for the service storage record of this, the last update would have been at 1:32 today, and if I go and refresh this, and now 52 now shows up in my top. It's in a resolve status. And if I refresh my server storage cache over here, I will find that that record has now been updated within the server cache record has been updated. So it's basically doing a comparison of those two, the record update date and what's in the server storage. And if the record update date is sooner, it'll refresh it. So let me just, in terms of conclusion of this process, let me show you kind of the core script that is used behind here. So there's a script include, and this is for customers. They're not going to be able to you can edit this particular one. This is one we did leave the protection policy off, so these are editable, but we don't necessarily encourage it. But if there's some additional things you want to server-side cache and store, you can manipulate or update this within your installation. So some of the things that are in here, first of all, there is an overarching active flag that is a property being set. That's from that property that was on that page. There is what is the current language of the user and whether or not we're in a multi-language mode, which looks at this login select language property set to true or false. And then some of the functions you'll see in here is get the storage record for a key. And you'll see if there's multi-language mode, it will add the language into that. Get the storage data, which basically looks at the key and returns back the JSON data for that key. So that's a function to retrieve the what's in storage. And note that it'll either return a blank if you want that, or there's another flag here of to return null if you want it to return a null. So you can kind of have it check, is there any data already stored for this or not. Here's the equivalent function or the reverse function to set storage data, whether or not to set it in the background, the key, the data object to store. And then there's a function for getting the counted number of items, clearing the data within the storage. Which note with a clear you can pass it in a single key to just clear one of those server storage records, or otherwise it'll do all. And then there's the main function here which does a rebuild data, which basically clears the background data, goes through each of the languages and does a rebuild for each of those languages. And some of the things that it's doing in the rebuild, this is the main thing I wanted to show here, was it's going through all the defined card object types, not the REST ones, but the knowledge articles, catalog items, etc., and basically rebuilding all the card objects for each of those different types. It's going through and building the decision tree data, which comes from this decision tree decision branches, the catalog records and their data, the server storage health section, or the service health dashboard data is being rebuilt here. And that's basically extended and returning to kind of a count. There's functions here for basically rebuilding the structured data for the catalogs. So again, if there's something that makes sense to improve from a performance perspective, there's an option here to kind of write a function that would go and populate the storage data, and then you can manipulate and use that. And one thing to note on this too, that function, we do have a documentation around that, kind of an API here. So you go to server storage, you'll see some definitions of those or descriptions of the properties, the different functions that are already defined, and kind of how they interoperate. So that's kind of the extent of what I wanted to cover today as far as server storage and kind of how that works, and kind of the reason for it in terms of driving faster processing of the data that we use throughout the portal. Thank you.